There are confessions that set you free, and then there are confessions that destroy you, not because they come from nowhere, but because they confirm everything you refused to believe for years. This man was 71 years old. He had driven school buses, raised a family, and buried his wife of 32 years. He went to the Philippines looking for quiet, for warmth, for something that felt like living again. What he found instead was a woman who was very, very good at pretending. And when she finally told him the truth, every word of it, he wished, for one terrible moment, that she never had. She said my name first. That is the part I keep coming back to. Not sit down, or I have to tell you something, or any of the things you say when you are about to detonate a person's life. She just said Leo, quiet, flat, almost bored, and something in the way she said it told me that whatever came next was going to be permanent. We were sitting at the kitchen table in the house I was renting in Davao. It was a Tuesday morning in March of last year. The fan was running in the corner. There was coffee on the table that neither of us had touched. Outside, I could hear a neighbor's dog barking at something, the way it did every morning, and for a second I focused on that sound because it was the last ordinary thing I was going to hear for a while. I need to tell you something, Iris said, and I need you to let me finish before you say anything. I nodded. I don't know why. My hands were flat on the table, and I was looking at them. She told me everything. Not in pieces, not with tears or hesitation. She laid it out like she was reading from a document she had already reviewed several times and was satisfied with. She had never loved me. She had been with me because I had money and she needed it, and from the beginning, from the very first week, she had known exactly what she was doing and why. The kindness, the warmth, the late-night conversations about life and loss, and what we both wanted from whatever years we had left. All of it had been performance. Skilled, sustained, deliberate performance. She had planned, at some point that she did not specify exactly, to end things and disappear. The $510,000 I had given her and her family across 3 years was the point of the exercise, and she had nearly reached the number she had decided was enough. She said nearly. That was the word she used. Nearly enough. I sat there and listened to the whole thing without saying a word, the way she had asked me to. And when she finished, the fan kept running, and the dog kept barking, and the coffee kept sitting there going cold, and I thought, I already knew. On some level, I already knew all of this, and somehow that made it so much worse. I need to go back to the beginning. Not because I want to relive it, but because I think if I don't explain how I got there, none of the rest of it makes sense. My name is Leo Richardson. I am 71 years old. Originally from Seattle, Washington. I spent 34 years as a transportation manager for a public school district. Not glamorous work, but steady, important work. The kind that requires you to be reliable and calm and good at solving problems under pressure. I was good at it. I retired in 2017 with a pension, some savings, and a house in a suburb of Seattle that I shared with my wife, Donna, until she passed from a stroke in 2018. Donna and I had been married for 32 years. We had 2 sons, Patrick, who lives in Portland, and Marcus, who is in Phoenix. Good men, both of them, with their own families and their own lives. After Donna died, they checked on me regularly, and I appreciated it. And I also understood that there is a ceiling on how much your adult children can fill the space left by a person who was the center of your daily life for 3 decades. The house was very quiet. The mornings were very long. I ate dinner alone every night for 14 months, and I watched television until I fell asleep in the chair. And one day, I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror, and I barely recognized the man looking back. A colleague of mine from the district, a woman named Bev, who had retired a few years ahead of me, had moved to the Philippines with her husband after he retired. She sent occasional emails, photographs of sunsets, descriptions of the food, the cost of living, the pace of things. She said it had given them both a second wind. I read those emails with a kind of distant longing, the way you read about something that is meant for other people, not you. Then one morning in late 2019, I woke up at 4 in the morning and lay in the dark for 2 hours thinking about nothing in particular. And I booked a flight to Davao before I had breakfast. I want to be clear about my state of mind when I arrived. I was not looking for a romantic relationship. That is the truth, and I know it is the kind of thing people say when they are embarrassed about what they did find. But in my case, it is simply accurate. I was looking for warmth, for color, for the feeling of being somewhere that didn't remind me of every single thing I had lost. I had read enough about the Philippines to know it was not a place you went to be alone, and that appealed to me in a way I couldn't fully articulate at the time. I met Iris Santos in my second week in Davao at a small community event for local teachers that Bev's husband Robert had somehow gotten us both invited to. Bev and Robert had retired there themselves a year earlier and had built a comfortable life. They knew people, they knew places, and they had insisted on introducing me around rather than letting me drift. Iris was a school teacher. She taught 5th grade English at a private elementary school, and she had been invited to the event in her professional capacity as a sort of community liaison. She was 44 years old, composed, soft-spoken, and she spoke English with the careful precision of someone who had spent years teaching it to children. We talked for maybe 30 minutes that first evening. She asked about Seattle, genuinely curious, it seemed, about the weather, about the school system, about whether it was true that coffee was a serious matter there. I laughed and told her it was very serious indeed. She smiled. It was a restrained smile, not a performance. I thought, this is a person who doesn't smile unless she means it. Bev nudged me on the way home and said, "She seemed to like you." I told her not to start. But I thought about that conversation for the next 2 days, which was 2 days longer than I had thought about anything since arriving. I saw Iris again the following weekend. Robert had organized a small dinner, and she was there, and we ended up talking for nearly 3 hours while everyone else drifted in and out of the conversation around us. She told me about her job, about the children she taught, about her mother Conchita who lived nearby and was getting older and needed more help. She told me about her younger sister Lovely, who was trying to finish a business degree while working part-time. She spoke about her family with a quiet devotion that I found genuinely moving. There was no performance in it, or at least none that I could detect. She seemed like a person who had built her life around responsibility and love for the people near her, and that was something I recognized and respected. By the 4th or 5th time we met, it was clear that something was developing, and I was not resisting it. I told myself I was being careful. I told myself I was going slowly. Looking back, I was doing neither of those things. I was doing what a lonely man does when someone warm and attentive turns her full attention on him. I was falling, and I was calling it caution. By February of 2020, 2 months after arriving, Iris and I were spending most evenings together. She would come to the house I was renting after school, still in her teacher's clothes, and we would cook together, or sit on the small porch and talk while the evening cooled down. Those evenings felt like something I had not had in a long time. They felt like company that was chosen rather than obligated. I was aware of the age gap. She was 44 to my 68 at the time, and I was aware of what some people would assume about the nature of a relationship like ours. I chose not to care. What I felt was real, and she seemed to feel it too, and I decided that was enough. The first time money came into it, I barely noticed. Conchita needed medication that month that was difficult to get through the regular pharmacy, a specific blood pressure prescription that required a different supplier. Iris mentioned it on a Tuesday, not as a request, just as a worry she was carrying. I asked how much. She told me. I gave it to her that same evening, the equivalent of about $140. She said, "Leo, you don't have to." I said I wanted to. She thanked me quietly and didn't bring it up again. That is the template. I want you to understand the template, because once you see it everywhere, in what followed. And the fact that I didn't see it for 3 years is the thing I have had to come to terms with. Every request came wrapped in a real and specific problem. Every problem was something plausible and human. A family member's health, a school fee, a vehicle repair, a flooding issue in Conchita's house during the rainy season. Every time, Iris mentioned it without pressure, as a statement of worry, not a request for help. And every time, I offered. Because I wanted to. Because helping felt like love, and I needed to feel like I was loving someone. The amounts grew gradually enough that each step felt manageable. In the first year I gave roughly $31,000, still, I told myself, within the range of what a man in a relationship might spend supporting a partner's family in a country with a very different economic reality. I had done research on this. I had read expat forums. I knew that financial generosity was part of the dynamic in many relationships between Western men and Filipino women, and I had convinced myself that what we had was honest enough and mutual enough that the financial dimension did not define it. That conviction was the crack in my foundation. Everything else ran through it. By mid-2021, Iris had introduced me to more of her family, and each introduction came with a corresponding need. Her sister Lovely needed $4,200 for her final semester fees, plus a laptop for her coursework. Her cousin Roderick was starting a small auto repair business and needed tools and a deposit on a workspace. That came to $9,500. Conchita's house needed structural repairs after the rainy season. $7,800 for materials and labor. Each one arrived with documentation of a sort, a school invoice, a business estimate, a contractor's quote. Each one looked real, because it was real, or real enough. The invoices were genuine. The needs were genuine, at some level. What I did not understand, could not see, was that the needs were curated. That what I was experiencing was not the natural overflow of a family in difficulty, but a managed system of extraction in which the difficulties were real, but the framing was theater. I raised the question of money with Iris directly only once during that period, in October of 2021. We had just had a pleasant weekend together. A day trip to a waterfall outside the city, dinner at a place she liked near the waterfront, and I was feeling close to her, which is probably why I let my guard down enough to say what I said. Iris, I said, I want to ask you something, and I want you to know I'm not angry. I just want to be honest with each other. She looked at me steadily. Okay. The money I've been giving for your family. It's more than I expected. I'm not saying I regret it. I'm just wondering whether we should talk about it. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I understand. I never want you to feel used, Leo. That would break my heart. If you want to stop, just tell me. We don't need it. We will manage. The way she said it, calm, unhurt, as though she was the one releasing me from an obligation, made me feel immediately that I had been unkind. I backtracked. I said I didn't want to stop, I just wanted to communicate. She nodded and said communication was important, and she appreciated my honesty. We moved on to a different subject, and I felt, absurdly, grateful to her for making it easy. That conversation was her best piece of work in the entire 3 years. I have thought about it many times since. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She didn't make me feel guilty in any obvious way. She simply offered me the door and made clear she would not hold it against me if I walked through. And that was precisely the gesture that guaranteed I would not. By the end of 2021, the total had reached $148,000. By mid-2022, it was $290,000. By the beginning of 2023, it was approaching $400,000, and I had begun liquidating savings accounts I had intended to leave untouched. My son Patrick called me in February of 2023 and asked, carefully, whether I was all right. He had noticed some of the larger transfers when helping me organize some financial documents remotely. I had asked him to help me with a filing issue, and he had seen more than I intended. I told him I was fine, and that I was managing my money the way I saw fit. He said he trusted me, and that he was just checking. I heard the worry underneath it, and I chose not to engage with it. That is the part I carry the most guilt about. Not the money, though the money is significant and the loss is real. What I carry guilt about is that my son was worried and I brushed him aside, because acknowledging his worry would have meant looking at something I was not ready to look at. In the spring of 2023, something changed in Iris, and I noticed it even though I could not name it at the time. She became slightly more distant. Not dramatically, nothing you could point to easily, But small things shifted. She canceled plans once or twice, with reasons that felt thin. She was quieter at dinner, more distracted, slower to reach for my hand the way she usually did. I told myself she was tired from the school year, which was in its final intensive weeks. I told myself that every relationship has seasons, and this was a quiet one. I told myself a great many things that were designed to stop me from asking the obvious question. The obvious question announced itself in a way I could not avoid in late May of 2023. When I was using the tablet I shared with Iris for household things, grocery lists, local maps, that kind of thing, and an application opened that she had left logged in. It was a messaging application I didn't recognize by name. The conversation on the screen was in Tagalog, which I cannot read, but two things were immediately clear without reading a single word. First, the tone of the messages, the back and forth rhythm, the length, the frequency, was intimate. Second, there was a photograph. A man, roughly Iris's age, smiling at the camera from what looked like the interior of a car. It was not a family member. I had met enough of her family by then to know who belonged and who didn't. I closed the application. I put the tablet down. I went and stood on the porch for a long time, while the afternoon heat settled over the garden. I did not confront her that evening, or the next. I spent nearly 2 weeks doing something I am not proud of, which is gathering information in the quiet, sideways manner of a person who already knows what they're going to find, but needs to find it at a pace they can survive. I noticed how often she looked at her phone and when. I noticed that there were certain evenings when she found a reason to leave early, always with a gracious explanation. I noticed that when she laughed, the full, unguarded laugh that I had loved, it was increasingly at her phone screen rather than at anything I said. I didn't hire anyone. I didn't dig through her things. I simply paid attention, which is what I should have been doing for 3 years, and what I saw was enough. I brought it to her on a Sunday evening in early June. I chose Sunday because it was the day we most reliably spent together, and I wanted to be able to say what I needed to say in a place where there was no easy excuse to leave. "I need to talk to you about something," I said. "Okay," she said, and something in her face shifted. Not fear exactly, something more like readiness. "I saw a conversation on the tablet," I said, "a few weeks ago. I don't know who the man is. I'd like you to tell me." She didn't deny it. That was the first thing that surprised me. I had expected a denial, or at least a moment of it, because that is what people do when they are caught. She didn't deny it. She was quiet for about 10 seconds, and then she said, "His name is Ronaldo. I've known him for 2 years. 2 years. I did the math immediately and involuntarily. 2 years put the beginning of whatever that was, at almost exactly the same time as our relationship was deepening, almost exactly the same time as the larger transfers had begun. "Did you love him?" I asked. She looked at the floor. "It was complicated. Did you love me?" I asked. She didn't answer. And in that silence, the 6 or 7 seconds she took before she said anything, I heard the whole story. I heard it in the way I had heard difficult things over a long life. Not with my ears, but with the part of me that had always known things I refused to admit I knew. Then she looked up and said, "Leo, I need to tell you something, and I need you to let me finish." And that is where I came in. That is where this story started, with her saying my name at the kitchen table and laying it all out flat. Because what came next was not the partial admission I had expected, the reluctant confession of a secret relationship and an apology designed to preserve what we had built. What came next was the full account, systematic, honest in the way that a person is honest when they have decided that honesty now serves their interests better than continued performance. She said she had never loved me. She said it clearly and without cruelty, but also without softness. She said she had seen, from the beginning, what I needed, what a man like me, newly widowed and transplanted and hungry for connection, would respond to, and she had provided it. She said the planning had not been cold and calculated from day one, that it had grown into something more deliberate as she understood the scale of what was available. She said that Ronaldo knew. He had known for most of 2 years. She did not elaborate on that, and I did not ask her to. She said the $510,000. And yes, she knew the number, she said it precisely, had been the goal she had been working toward, and she was close. She said she had intended to end things in a way that would not raise alarms. A gradual withdrawal, a gentle separation, something that would leave me sad but not suspicious. And by the time I examined my finances closely enough to understand the full scope of what had happened, she would be well removed from the situation. She said she was telling me now because I had asked a direct question about Ronaldo, and she was tired of the performance. That was the word she used. Tired of the performance. She had been doing it for 3 years and she was finished. I sat there for a long time after she finished. Long enough that the light in the room changed as the sun moved outside. Then I said, "Why tell me all of it? You could have just admitted to Ronaldo and walked away. Why the whole story?" She considered the question seriously, which somehow made everything worse. Then she said, "Because you deserve to know, and because I don't want to do this to someone else." I didn't know what to do with that. I still don't. She left about an hour later. She took what was hers, which was not much, because she had never officially moved in, and she said goodbye at the door, with a quiet courtesy that felt obscene, given everything that had just happened. I said nothing. I stood at the door and watched her walk to the gate and through it and down the street, and then I closed the door and sat down on the floor of the entry hall like a man who has had his legs taken from under him, which is more or less what had happened. The days that followed were the worst I have experienced since Donna died. Worse, in some ways, because grief for someone you have lost is clean. What I was feeling was something murkier, a grief for a relationship that had never existed, a humiliation at having been managed so precisely, a rage at myself for every moment I had chosen comfort over clarity. I was not able to eat properly for about a week. I was not able to sleep in a way that left me rested. I sat on the porch in the evenings and looked at the garden and felt the specific weight of 3 years of misplaced trust pressing down on the center of my chest. I called Patrick on the 3rd day. He answered on the 2nd ring, which told me he had been waiting for a call of some kind. I told him what had happened, not all of it at once. It came out in pieces over about 40 minutes, and he listened to every piece without interrupting, except to say he was there and he was listening. When I finished, he said, "Dad, I'm so sorry. Are you safe? Are you okay physically?" I told him I was physically fine. He said he was going to look at flights. I told him not to do that, and then I told him the number, $510,000. And there was a silence on the line that told me he understood the full dimension of what I was saying. "We'll figure it out," he said. "That's not what matters right now. What matters is you." I appreciated that more than I could say. I also knew it wasn't entirely true. The money matters. It matters enormously. It will shape the rest of my life in ways I am still calculating. But I understood what he was doing, and I needed him to do it. I spoke with a lawyer in Davao the following week, a colleague of Robert's who handled cases involving fraud and financial exploitation. She was direct with me in the way that good lawyers are direct, which is to say she did not soften what she had to say in ways that would give me false hope. The confession, she explained, while damning in a moral sense, presented complications in a legal one. There were no contracts. The transfers had been made willingly. The money had moved through accounts in ways that would be difficult to trace at this point. A case was possible but not strong, and the cost of pursuing it, financial, temporal, emotional, would be significant, and the recovery uncertain. I thought about it for 2 weeks and then I decided against pursuing legal action. That decision was not resignation, it was arithmetic. I am 71 years old. I have a finite amount of time and energy, and I was not willing to spend years of whatever I have left in courtrooms, in a foreign country fighting for money I would probably not recover. Some losses, I told myself, have to be absorbed as the price of experience. It is a brutal thing to tell yourself, but I told it to myself until it stopped feeling like surrender and started feeling like survival. Robert and Bev came by almost every day in that first month. Bev brought food. Robert sat with me on the porch and didn't always talk, which was exactly right. There are friends who know when the most valuable thing they can offer is presence, without pressure, and Robert was that kind of friend. I am grateful for them in a way I will not forget. Marcus flew out from Phoenix in July. I had not asked him to, and I tried to talk him out of it, but he came anyway, which told me something about who he is. He stayed for 10 days. We drove around Davao together, and he let me show him the city, the places I had come to love over 3 years, without making me feel that I had been foolish to love them. He did not once say anything that could be interpreted as, "I told you so," which, given that he had never met Iris and had known nothing about the full scope of the relationship, was genuinely generous. On his last night, we sat on the porch after dinner, and he said, "You know, this doesn't mean you were wrong to want what you wanted, right? You weren't wrong to want it. You just trusted the wrong person with it." I have thought about that many times since. It helps, in the way that the right sentence at the right moment helps, not by solving anything, but by making the weight feel slightly less personal. I am still in Davao as I write this. I know that surprises people when I tell them that after everything that happened I stayed, but the truth is, I came here for reasons that were real and that still exist. The city is not the woman. The warmth here is not the warmth I thought she represented. Those are different things, and I needed to be clear in my own mind about which one I was reacting to. If I had left immediately, I would never have known which it was. I have scaled my life back significantly. The house I am in now is smaller than the one I was renting before. Simpler, with a small garden I manage myself. My financial situation requires careful management and modest expectations for the foreseeable future, and I have accepted that with something approaching equanimity, though some mornings the acceptance comes harder than others. The thing about what Iris told me, the confession, all of it, is that it was, in a perverse way, a gift. I do not mean that in a way that minimizes how devastating it was, because it was devastating. I mean that she gave me the truth, and the truth, however brutal, gave me a foundation. What I had before was a story with gaps that I was filling in with hope. What I have now is clarity. Clarity is painful in a way that hope is not, but it is also solid in a way that hope never was. I have thought about who Iris actually is, not the character she performed for 3 years, but the person underneath it. I think she is someone who grew up without enough, in a country where the gap between want and have is a daily fact of life, and who found a way to close that gap that she could live with, at least for a while. I do not excuse it. I do not forgive it easily. But I also do not need to make her a monster to survive it. Monsters are simple. What she did was not simple. It was human in a way I find harder to dismiss than simple malice. What I was, what I allowed myself to be, was a man so hungry for warmth that I rationed the evidence against it. I had the instincts. I noticed things. I had that conversation in October of 2021 that was, in retrospect, the moment I could have changed course, and I chose instead to accept her easy reassurance because it was easier than facing what I already suspected. That is the part I own fully, not the theft. She is responsible for the theft. But the willful blindness, the deliberate not looking, that was mine. My son Patrick asked me last month, during one of our regular calls, whether I think I will ever let someone close again. I told him I didn't know. I told him I thought the capacity was still there. I could feel it, which was both reassuring and terrifying. He said, "Just take your time, Dad." Simple advice, the right advice. Some mornings I sit in the garden before the heat gets serious, and I drink my coffee and I watch the birds move through the trees at the back fence, and I let myself feel whatever is there without trying to manage it. Some mornings what is there is grief. Some mornings it is anger. Some mornings, more often lately, it is something quieter. Not happiness exactly, but the condition that can become happiness if you give it enough time and enough air. I did not go halfway around the world to get robbed. I went to feel alive again, and for 3 years, even inside a lie, I felt more alive than I had since Donna died. That is a complicated thing to hold alongside the rage and the loss. But I am 71 years old, and I have learned, slowly and at considerable cost, that real life is almost always complicated. The fan is still running. The coffee goes cold sometimes, before I drink it. The neighbor's dog still barks every morning, at whatever it is that bothers it. And I am still here. That is not nothing. Some days, it is everything.